Stacey, I saw your tweet. You put out there, you retweeted that Bukele has now moved all of this Bitcoin, sounds like 5,000 full coins, to cold storage, which it's funny. We were doing the show Wednesday, and I was just me, and I was answering a lot of questions. And again, to the point, there's people in the chat who are very knowledgeable. And then someone's like, well, what's a cold wallet? What's a this? What's a that? Why are we? So both of you retweeted how significant that is. But let's explain to the audience. First of all, it just shows how Bukele was genius. And when he bought Bitcoin and then the price dropped because of the FTX thing, everyone was like, oh no, he's gambling. And now we've hit all-time highs. So he's looking even smarter than ever. But explain the significance of a country moving 5,000 Bitcoin, if not more, to cold storage and what that means.
Well, it's historic. This is a really historic event. Like in 1,000 years from now, they'll still talk about this. It was 5,689 gram. Don't, shortchange us. Right?
I just saw that number. I saw 5,000 on Twitter.
So, this is sovereignty like we've never seen before. Like no nation has been so sovereign and so free as El Salvador is today. And El Salvador is rich. Like the media has had it wrong. The media has said for several years, now 2.5 years, that this would impoverish the nation, that Bitcoin policy and economic liberty would impoverish El Salvador, when in fact it is done the opposite. This is granted the people of El Salvador, the country of El Salvador, sovereignty, which is there's really no price for that, right? That's something that is hard to even quantify, to put a number on what the value of that is. But when you see it, when you see what we have here, it's such a mind-blowing brand, and you can see that in the responses. But Max also had a really great response to President Bukele's tweet announcing that he had moved this 5,689 plus coins to a cold wallet, about the investment grade and how the rating agencies will need to rethink their rating on El Salvador.
Yeah, true. So similar to what Michael Saylor is doing over there at MicroStrategy. So he's buying Bitcoin, putting it on the balance sheet that improves his collateral status and ability to float more stock and more bonds to buy more Bitcoin. And then the Bitcoin goes higher, and then he's got more collateral. So he's traded as something of a perpetual motion machine, and he's actually outperforming Bitcoin. And there's no limit really to how far that this can go. They've increased their balance sheet. When they started off, they were worth $2 billion. I think they're worth close to 40 billion now, or something like that. But similarly with El Salvador, so by putting Bitcoin on the reserves of the country, they're improving their collateral base. And so therefore their rating, which is currently below investment grade or junk, interest rates are relatively high. But as they increase their Bitcoin position, the rating will get better and the interest rates will be lower, and they'll be able to borrow more. And with those borrowed funds, they can buy more Bitcoin. So they've done something similar to Saylor, but on a sovereign level. So Bukele is like the sovereign version of the Saylor playbook applied to El Salvador. And that can keep going on for quite some time. So they can become the richest country in Central America, certainly, but one of the richest countries in the world, because most countries have all their strategic reserves in fiat money, and fiat money is collapsing against Bitcoin. So, El Salvador is moving into an excellent position financially speaking.
Yeah, that's the thing that's so amazing is what he's doing for the citizens of El Salvador. He's guaranteeing the wealth of not just the nation, but all of the citizenry. I mean, I don't know of any other leader that's done this.
Well, this is a masterclass in governance, good governance, right? And he is not only showing to the world how to be a sovereign nation, but also to the citizens can now audit him, right? And the government, his government, right? right? The citizens now have so much more. Like when they talk about democracy, when the US talks about democracy and finger wags here, like this is extreme democracy in terms of the people get so much transparency into the government. They could see so much into what the government is doing. How many dollars are there in the world? How much gold is there in Fort Knox, right? Do we know? No. But now everybody in the world, anybody in the world can audit the treasury of El Salvador, the Bitcoin treasury, and certainly so can the citizens. So they can verify for themselves that all the things that the Reuters and the Bloombergs and the Wall Street Journals of the world have said about El Salvador's, failed Bitcoin experiment, they can verify for themselves that that is FUD. They can verify for themselves that the reports from recently from Barclays that it's also a failure, right? That they could audit. They could look at the number. They can go to the mempool. They could, look on the blockchain and see on chain that we have 5,689 Bitcoin here, and they could say, well, who's right, the 5,689 Bitcoin there, or this research report by somebody who's never been to El Salvador, and they just pull research out of their bottom.
Yeah, I mean, in the States, there's always people saying, audit the Fed, audit Fort Knox. Fort Knox hasn't been audited in almost 100 years or something. It's been an enormous amount of time. The Fed hasn't been audited really in any meaningful time frame. So there's no real knowledge about what is on the Fed's balance sheet or what's in Fort Knox. And so here with El Salvador, you just look and you can see exactly the wallet address, exactly how much Bitcoin they hold. And, the president was tweeting that it's a large chunk of the holdings. And so, more to come. There's more good news in the pipeline. And I think that they understand that this is a way to ratchet up their financial position using this, gaming the system, essentially. So the rating agency, you see, everything can be gamed in your favor. The rating agencies think they're so smart by politicizing the ratings game and saying this country is not investment grade because they don't support who we support. It's a game. They game. It's all politicized. So, but you can always reverse it and game them. So you can use the fact that they've got a lower rating and higher rates to build out essentially a leverage position against them. Because remember, the goal is a speculative attack, and fiat money is the victim. And so, like Michael Saylor, El Salvador is now on the warpath. We're going to take fiat money down. And so they can play all the games that they want, but they're holding fiat money, so they lose before it starts. And it's just fun to watch. They're like the Craig Wright of fiat money. It's like Jerome Powell and Craig Wright are the same, cut from the same cloth. They're both insanely and ill prepared to deal with life. And this is just going to become more apparent.
Yeah, it's also it's so amazing because it is so transparent and it blows up so many of the, first of all, Bitcoin's only used for criminal activity. Well, no, it's on the blockchain. We can see it. We know where it is. Then it blows up Bukele's a dictator. Tell me one dictator in history that's A, given his citizens a currency of their own, and B, and then says, I'm putting this transparently, the holdings of this country. No king, no dictator has ever done this. They've never. It is a transformative a moment.
He's giving them truth. He's doing the opposite of what totalitarianism is. Totalitarianism tries to gaslight you constantly. They remove the fabric of reality around you. They make you question everything because you doubt everything, and therefore you have no truth at all in your life. And that's why they always memory hole things. They memory hole the past. They rewrite the past. That's why the Google Gemini thing, the AI, they rewrite the past. And that's gaslighting, that's totalitarianism. Whereas he is revealing the truth. He's just giving them the truth of their situation, of the circumstances of their monetary system. Because remember, when he spoke at CPAC, he was so brilliant at articulating the falsity, the illusion of what the dollar is, and what an all fiat system is. That is total illusion. And it's really, it is so totalitarian. And what he's describing is that use violence essentially, through the forcing you to pay taxes or else you'll go to prison, even though it's totally printed out of thin air. Like they're forcing you to believe or say you believe. You don't have to believe, but you have to say you believe that this dollar is worth something. So he's doing the opposite, right? He's not presenting you with an illusion. He's presenting you with truth.
And the other thing too, like Max, you were talking about the audits. There's been no audits, any meaningful audits of the Fed or Fort Knox. Also, I would put the Pentagon in there. Whenever they're audited, rarely it's audited. It's just like, oh wow, huh? Budget? What? They lost $21 trillion. They lost it, which is understandable. I probably have $1 trillion under my bank, my seat cushions in my car. We've all lost $1 trillion here and there.
We've all been there.
We've all. I mean, I probably have $1 trillion in a winter jacket somewhere, just sitting in a pocket. So would that make sense? But this is like, it is, it's an amazing moment in time. And I think they don't know what to do with him because they're all of their tricks aren't working. He's a dictator, wrong. Bitcoin's a scam, wrong. And so, he goes to CPAC, like Stacey just said, and said, oh, taxation is theft because you guys just print everything. So it feels like, it's something you've always said, you can't change Bitcoin, it changes you, that eventually America is just going to have to capitulate. Right?
Cometh the hour, cometh the man. Everything was prepped for the appearance of a hero, essentially, And into the arena walks the President Bukele. The times were begging for a hero, and he's the hero of our time. It just go through history, and this is the way heroes kind of happen, and this is the way history changes. And we've seen it before. We've seen it in the U.S. before. We've seen it in history, and this is El Salvador's time. They're leading the world out of the fourth turning. They're leading the world out of the fiat money dark ages. They're leading the world out of the criminal mafia global syndicate that are the central banks and the corrupt nation states. And so we're seeing that moment in history. And of course, it's going to be a slow grind until that's ubiquitously understood. But once it is, then you'll have a consciousness raising experience that will be appreciated greatly by all.
How do you see that consciousness raising? I love when you talk about that. Like, I know we're just getting into fortune telling a little bit, but like America is this monolith. It uses this violence. It's a very violent culture. But it feels like there's enough that there are people in America that are like somewhat waking up. I don't know if they will in our lifetimes, but how is that going to happen? I don't know. We're just kind of theorizing here, but how do you see it happening? If it can happen?
Well, it's always like just at the margin, right? You only need 20% of the population, right, to be enlightened. And I think you're already seeing it. Like you see Bitcoin spreading. It's going to hit 20% of the population. And that's all you need, right? Every revolution, that's all you need to shift the entire dynamic of the world. And well, if you look at the global situation, so you have a little country like El Salvador, and we only have 6.5 million people, but 92% of them already shifted consciousness, right? That's a pretty amazing feat. And I think that, I think excellence can inspire more excellence. You can raise the game of other people. And I think President Bukele has done that for other leaders. I think somebody like President Bukele is just a once in 500 year type leader. It's hard to get that right mix all right into a guy who could articulate and have charisma and the right looks and the right, oratory powers. But there are some that are close, they're okay. They're better than most, right? And I think he'll up the game of those that aren't quite like king level, philosopher king level, but he'll inspire some to aim for that at least, and then they'll lift up some more of their population. And I think you're already seeing it through Latin America, right? He's inspired so many leaders throughout Latin America because they want to be like him. They want to be popular like him. They want to get it right like him. So he's going, like, there will be copycats. And yeah, sure, the copycats probably won't be as good as the real thing, but it will start to trickle through and you'll get a critical mass around the world. That will be the consciousness raising.
Yeah, I think there'll be a critical mass of people who have the wherewithal to opt out. So when you have a majority of the population can simply say no, because I've got unconfiscatable wealth. I have all the wealth I'll ever need because fiat money has crashed. Even my 10 Bitcoin, 5 Bitcoin, even 1 Bitcoin gives me all the wealth I'll need. And I'm simply opting out. I'm not going to pay taxes. I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to do anything you ask me to do at all. I'm not completely opting out. If you have critical mass of people do this, then the institutional abuse that we're all suffering through collapses.
Yeah, and I think too, in terms of like what you're saying, the critical mass and just the 20%. I mean, I was reading, I think, aren't Americans the largest number of highest population of people that own Bitcoin live in America? So maybe not all of them understand it yet, but I think they could.
I think maybe it might be the case that the largest number of KYC'd Bitcoin holders live in America. I'm not sure that we don't know. There's a lot of non-KYC Bitcoin out there from 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Certainly since KYC exchanges came on board, Americans have bought there. But, there was massive amounts of mining, huge amounts of mining throughout Eastern Europe back in the early days in 2009, 10, 11, 12. 13, 14, there were a lot of Eastern European miners, and that's because they were using subsidized gas prices from Russia. So, of course, that doesn't exist anymore over there. But they had very cheap gas prices, natural gas prices. So they were dominant miners back in the early days. And then the Chinese miners came on, and they were getting free electricity prices through some corruption, but they have massive amounts of Bitcoin that was, no KYC. They mined it into existence and they held on to it. You could see that the Chinese miners never really dumped en masse. So we don't know who owns it. We don't know. Americans like to think they won World War II. They won all the wars. They beat everybody. They're the king of everything. But and of course they probably say we own everything, but. Certainly the products like the ETFs and all the stuff bought on exchanges that has been KYC'd, I would say probably the United States, US citizens own the most.
Yeah, but you say this, with the question, you reveal something interesting here. You're saying, I hear the highest concentration of Bitcoin owners is in the United States, but we're heading into a world where borders are becoming superfluous, where the nation state itself is being reinvented and challenged and probably collapsing. So national borders are becoming less of a factor. The Bitcoin community, it's an international community, and it's a very agile and movable center of gravity. It's like, I'm always fascinated by flocks of starlings who they fly in these groups where they're thousands at a time, and there's through the sky in these patterns called murmurations, where it's ebbing and flowing like an ocean. And they don't seem to bump into each other. They seem to all be knowing, like when we watch a drone exhibit of 1,000 drones all working in concert, it's incredible technology, and it took 1,000 years to get there. But these starlings have been doing it for, quite a long time. And so this is kind of the Bitcoin community. We're all sovereign unto ourselves, but we can pick and choose who we fly with at any moment. We can fly in this part of the murmuration, that part of the murmuration, or not part of the murmuration. And that murmuration will continue based on the ebbs and flows of Bitcoin mentality and Bitcoin psychology and Bitcoin philosophy, which is all connected electronically anyway. So it's just a matter of going with the flow, literally. And nation state borders will become increasingly meaningless. I mean, in the US, they've given up on their borders anyway. And they've said, we don't really have a border. And they're just allowing really a borderless country to exist. And that's having, pluses and minuses, right? It's putting a tremendous strain on the infrastructure, and then that part of the economy will collapse. But it also will decapitalize and demonetize the ruling elites who will have nobody to rule over because they've, as Johnny Cash would say, you can have my pile of dirt. I'm the king of my, pile of dirt, essentially, will be the new national anthem in the United States.
Yeah, and I think when they try to like force CBDCs down everywhere, especially in America, that's when more Americans will go, bye, I'm out. I'm getting into Bitcoin. I have a cold wallet or whatever. I think that'll push a lot of people into this, like either physically leaving America or even just digitally leaving, because they're like,
I don't think the US will do a CBDC.
You don't?
No. They'll lose the euro areas, the second tier, of the fiat, the dollar is a Bitcoin equivalent. And then all the other currencies are the shit coins, right? So the dollar is the king of shit coins, and there's no reason for them to give up as it is right now. I think they would rather have banks issue their own stable coins, for example. That will be a better projection of power. I don't think, no, I don't, they would, their US banks are force multipliers, right? Power multipliers across the world. So if you remove the power of the banks to print money, then it's just the government. And I think, therefore, the illusion that President Bukele talks about that is so important to the U.S. might and the power of the dollar is destroyed if you just remove the middleman, which is the bank, which are the banks, Wall Street. So if you take it from them and give it to Jerome Powell, then you're seeing the Wizard of Oz right behind it. And I think it would remove the power of the dollar. So I think the U.S. I think they're way too clever to do that. I don't think they would do that. But Euro, yeah, the Eurozone, they'll do a CBDC, but they're more, that's part of their culture anyway as well. Like the populations across most of Europe are more socialist. They expect all these government services. They don't mind surveillance, where the US is not even in our culture. Like we don't, we don't tolerate surveillance on the sort of, in government interference in our personal lives to the extent that Europeans do.